June 4, 1943, at the Norfolk Naval Base in Virginia. Underoffizier Herman Butcher clutched the railing of the ship while he made his way down the gangplank, his legs shaky following 14 days spent crossing the Atlantic Ocean. Through the haze that hung in the morning air, he saw something that defied the 3 years of Nazi propaganda he had known. On the docks, American laborers, both white and black, worked side by side with machinery that looked as if it came from another century altogether. Women, dressed in coveralls, were operating the cranes. At the entrance gates, children were busy selling newspapers. No one ran away at the appearance of enemy uniforms. "Die Spin and de American Americana," he murmured to the man behind him. "The Americans are crazy." Butcher would go on to describe this moment in his memoir, Behind Barbed Wire, which was published in Germany in 1952. It stands as one of the most comprehensive accounts of POW life in the United States. The Norfolk base stretched over 4,300 acres, with its piers going farther than the eye could see, and its cranes busily moving cargo on and off dozens of ships at once. During a single morning, this single harbor managed freight amounts greater than what Hamburg could handle in an entire week. Yet it was not just the vastness that shocked the incoming prisoners. It was the prevailing sense of normality. Civilians moved about freely near the military facilities. Vendors offered coffee and donuts within view of the warships. A brass band performed popular songs at a nearby rally for war bonds. On American ground, 2,500 veterans from the RML's Africa Corps stood assembled in ranks. This was the first large group of what would total 425,000 German POWs kept in the United States by the war's conclusion. In the months ahead, what they saw would not simply be America's plenty, since that tale has already been recounted. They would observe something far more disturbing to those with a soldier's mindset. A country waging war that declined to behave as though it were at war. Here was a society so confident of its own strength that it welcomed deadly adversaries as if they were unruly visitors, and a populace whose peculiar habits and unfathomable ways would end up being more damaging to Nazi dogma than any defeat suffered on the battlefield. At Norfolk, the initial stage of processing began with what Butcher would later refer to as the first impossibility in his memoir. German military policy, observed from Poland through France to Africa, dictated that captives were either resources to be used or problems to be efficiently dealt with. The Geneva Convention was followed when it suited them and disregarded at other times. However, at this location, American officers read out the Geneva Convention guidelines in perfect German, clarified prisoners' rights, and inquired about food preferences. As documented by the International Red Cross in June 1943, Jewish American staff members, a number of whom were sergeants with distinctively Jewish last names, handed out Red Cross boxes while informing prisoners that kosher food could be provided to any Jewish detainees. Some Wehrmacht soldiers nervously laughed, suspecting it was a joke. It was not a jest. The U.S. military had planned for religious dietary accommodations for enemy soldiers. The health checks contradicted standard military reasoning. Wounded German captives were given penicillin, that near miraculous drug rarely seen in German field clinics, on par with American servicemen themselves. Swiss Red Cross Inspector Guy Matroy observed in his July 1943 assessment, "The standard of healthcare given to German PS matches or even surpasses what American personnel received themselves." Prisoners openly voiced their disbelief about the standard of medical treatment. At Norfolk, African American medical staff operated as part of integrated teams, although that was not common throughout the military elsewhere. In one confirmed incident, a black medical specialist drew blood samples from Wehrmacht officers as part of routine medical testing. In Germany, such interracial contact was strictly prohibited by law. Here, it was standard military procedure. The most baffling experience came at their initial meal. German POWs were taken to a dining area where U.S. sailors were already eating. Both groups' opposing forces who had sought to kill one another in convoy engagements dined in the same building. Americans gathered at one end, Germans at the other, using identical food queues and being served equivalent meals. The Americans paid little attention to their adversaries, focusing on a baseball game broadcast over the radio rather than on the German POWs seated just 50 feet away. The 3-day rail trip to inland camps produced a new level of mental bewilderment. In contrast to Germany's covert handling of prisoners, American officials made no attempt to conceal the PSWs. The prisoners traveled not by freight wagons but in genuine passenger train cars with padded seating, making stops at normal stations where local people appeared to watch. At Union Station in Washington, D.C., as seen by hundreds of witnesses and recorded in June 1943 station logs, German POWs saw American families bidding farewell to soldiers departing for military training. Wives embraced their husbands in public. Children waved small flags. Teenagers sat together at the station cafe sharing milkshakes. On the very same platform, foes and civilian families were divided only by glass panes and guards, who were seemingly busier with traffic management than monitoring the captives. As the train wound through industrial regions, sites that would generally be kept out of sight or camouflaged, American factories displayed their titles in massive block letters. From their train windows, the prisoners could see the Glenn L. Martin airplane plant parking areas in Baltimore, packed with workers' private cars. They could count the number of B-26 bombers ready for shipment. Nothing was hidden from view. There was no sign of fear or obsession with secrecy, only American production continuing transparently within plain sight of their adversaries. Rolling through Pennsylvania, the trains passed by coal mines and endless steel plants working without pause. Nighttime skies glimmered orange from the ceaseless burning of blast furnaces. Workers' neighborhoods, consisting of separate homes with garden plots, stretched for miles on all sides, replacing the barracks of most European factories. Electric bulbs shone from every house, and rooftop radio aerials were everywhere to be seen. At the Harrisburg, Pennsylvania stop, logged in the Pennsylvania Railroad archives, German officers watched as American laborers rotated their shifts. Men walked by with lunch pails, donning leather footwear and wristwatches, and driving their own cars. In Butcher's words from his memoir, a worker discarded a partially eaten apple and casually pulled another fresh one from his lunch container. This nonchalant waste of food by a worker shocked officers who had previously witnessed their own troops struggle over leftovers in Africa. Camp Hearn in Texas began operations in December 1942, situated on 720 acres close to the town of Hearn within Robertson County. According to military documents, it was designed to accommodate as many as 4,800 German POWs, providing living standards surpassing what most experienced in their civilian lives. The Army Corps of Engineers and War Department files stored at the National Archives extensively detail the camp's construction and management. The camp's facilities challenged German beliefs about how prisoners of war should be treated. Wooden housing units featured electric lighting rather than oil lanterns. Every building was equipped with indoor plumbing, flushable toilets, and boilers for hot water. Prisoners slept in individual beds with mattresses, bed linens, and blankets, not on straw bedding. Recreational buildings contained ping-pong tables, musical instruments, and book collections. Swiss Inspector Emil Sandstorm, in his August 1943 inspection, remarked, "Conditions at Camp Hearn not only surpass Geneva Convention standards, but also are better than living arrangements many of these men had in Germany." Lieutenant Colonel Cecile Stiles, the camp commander whose military career is documented in official archives, addressed new arrivals in their native German. He had taken university-level German studies before joining the military. He outlined the regulations for the camp, yet he also described something novel. Prisoners would manage many aspects of their own affairs within the boundaries of the compound. They selected their own leaders, set up their own events, controlled their daily routines as long as military rules were observed. The idea of self-governance among captives was unprecedented and seemed either naive or suspicious. The camp's infirmary, reviewed monthly by International Red Cross representatives, included equipment superior to what was found in numerous German civilian hospitals. It housed X-ray technology, operating rooms, dental facilities, and pharmaceuticals, including penicillin, the groundbreaking new medication. In September 1943, when prisoner Georg Gardner, later recognized as the last POW to give up in 1985, developed appendicitis, he underwent surgery just hours later, carried out by Captain William Calhoun, an Army doctor from Dallas, with the aid of German prisoner medical personnel. Yet, they were most surprised by the camp canteen, a shop where POWs used script earned from voluntary jobs to buy supplies. The inventory included cigarettes, sweets, soap, stationery, music instruments, and art materials. The Quartermaster Corps recorded that the War Department allowed these sales because providing small luxuries was thought to help sustain prisoner morale and decrease escape incidents. The concept that enemy captives could shop, make selections, or have access to anything beyond the basics was bewildering to military authorities. By September 1943, acute worker shortages prompted the use of POW labor across Texas. The War Manpower Commission, working with the Provost Marshal General's office, permitted prisoners to work on farms and in non-defense sectors. POWs earned 80 cents per day in canteen currency, matching the entry-level pay for American soldiers. There are still comprehensive records of these labor projects located in National Archives Record Group 389. On the King Ranch, located near Kingsville, German prisoners found themselves exposed to farming on a vast scale unfamiliar in Europe. This ranch spanned 825,000 acres, even surpassing Rhode Island's total area. Ranch documents from 1943 to 1945 detail that German POWs worked together with Mexican-American cowboys and some black ranch workers in cattle operations. Although contact outside of work remained limited, this racial mixture contradicted the Nazi doctrines of racial superiority. Prisoners expressed their astonishment at mechanization in correspondence that passed through military censors. A single combine harvester supplanted the labor of many workers. Crops were transported by trucks instead of wagons pulled by horses. The ranch also employed airplanes, specifically small civilian aircraft, to monitor cattle herds and locate missing animals. Ranch foreman Richard Clayburgh Jr. regarded the German PWs as temporary staff members rather than as adversaries, as shown in ranch employment documents. At cotton gins across Texas, with confirmed activities in Taylor, Caldwell, and Waller counties, PWs observed processing speeds unattainable in Europe. The Hearn Cotton Oil Mill, which utilized PW labor from August 1943 to December 1945, handled more cotton daily than German textile plants processed in an entire month. Still, workers routinely paused for breaks, enjoyed complete lunches, and listened to the radio during their shifts. Productivity resulting from fair treatment instead of harsh discipline was contrary to Wehrmacht experiences. The PWs learned that American farmers conversed openly about politics. Declassified FBI surveillance files from the 1970s documented German PWs' astonishment at farmers openly criticizing Roosevelt and complaining about government regulations without fear. At one reported event on a farm near Bryan, Texas, a farmer told a Department of Agriculture inspector to go to hell during a disagreement about crop allocation. The farmer suffered no repercussions. This kind of authority defiance would have meant execution in Nazi Germany. Texas newspapers reported extensively on interactions between German prisoners and American residents. The Hearn Democrat, Bryan Daily Eagle, and Temple Daily Telegram all published stories covering PW work assignments and community encounters. These period sources serve as confirmation of the social interactions that greatly surprised the military prisoners. In December 1943, the Hearn Democrat described German PWs on supervised holiday shopping trips, where they witnessed aspects of American youth culture. Teenagers gathered at soda fountains in drugstores, boys and girls mingling without supervision. They danced to music from jukeboxes, including genres such as jazz and swing that Nazi propaganda deemed degenerate Negro music. They wore trendy outfits despite the war, with no evidence of a militarized youth. The behavior of American women was especially bewildering to the prisoners. Women drove trucks at the Hearn Cotton Oil Mill, ran businesses on Main Street, and managed male employees in defense factories. At the nearby Bryan Army Airfield, which was involved in the Women Air Force Service Pilots (WASP) program, female aviators piloted military planes. Military documentation verifies WASP flights from Bryan Field from 1943 to 1944, where PWs on work assignments in adjacent areas could see them. Churches all around Robertson County welcomed German prisoners to worship services. Records from the First Baptist Church of Hearne, First Methodist Church, and St. Mary's Catholic Church all include documentation of German PWs attending services. The December 24, 1943, edition of the Hearne Democrat stated, German prisoners attended Christmas Eve services at several churches, sitting among congregation members whose sons were serving abroad. No incidents were reported.